broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to this Areopa webinar about ALGO for GitHub. It's a minute before 4 and I can still see people coming in. So I'll do a slow introduction and then I hope that most of the people who wanted to join had the time and the opportunity to join. But as always, this session is also recorded. So if you're surprised to hear me, my name is Tobias Fenster. I'm a stand-in for the usual moderators who couldn't join for today. So I have the great honor of being the moderator for the 54th Areopa webinar, a great job done by Luke and the others who are running this. And today we have the topic of ALGO for GitHub, where Freddy Kristiansen, the father and creator of this solution, has agreed to join. Thanks a lot, Freddy, for joining and coming and sharing the knowledge on ALGO for GitHub today. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping rules. Your mic is muted, so you won't be able to directly talk or ask questions, but I will, during the webinar, look at the question window. So please put your questions into the GoToWebinar question window, and if it's something that is immediately important, then I will try to interrupt Freddy at a good moment and ask directly. Or if it's something that is better suited in a Q&A session in the end, then I will ask then. Something else I want to let you know is that we will have a raise your hands part in this session, and you can find that in the GoTo meeting as well, in the GoToWebinar meeting as well, where you can raise your hands, lower your hands, and that is something that we will use during this presentation. The webinar, as I said, will be recorded and published on YouTube. You can find the link here, and because there are so many great sessions already, and every second week or something like that, another session is being added, also feel free to subscribe to that list so you always get a notification when a new webinar appears. If you also want to get a preview of what is happening, then feel free to go to the Areopa webinar newsletter. You find the URL here where you can also subscribe, and you will get a notification when new webinars are added, and you can register and get a reminder when the webinars are happening. The upcoming webinars, and you can see the link here as well, are also very interesting topics. We have the telemetry topic, how to get data-driven in your partner practice with telemetry by Kenny Pontoppidan, also from Microsoft, at July 5th. And then at July 19th, Luc van Voogd is talking about test automation, why it is a team effort and not only a technical topic. Certainly two extremely relevant and two extremely interesting topics that are coming in the next weeks as well. And of course, Luc and colleagues are always looking for speakers and topics. So if you have an interesting thing you want to talk about, feel free to get in touch, or you have an idea about something that should be covered in one of the webinars, also feel free to get in touch, and then it might be organized there as well. Of course, none of this would be possible if we wouldn't have the chance to use the ForNuff infrastructure, the GoToWebinar. So thanks a lot to ForNuff for sponsoring this and allowing the webinars to happen. And with that, I would like to jump into the topic and hand the presentation over to Freddy so he can talk about ALGO for GitHub. So,
thank you. And I need to show this screen. Yep.
Yes, that looks good.
You can see my screen now.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tobias. And thank you for joining me in my current favorite topic, plug and play DevOps with ALGO for GitHub. So I have created a small agenda slide. I'm going to talk about what ALGO for GitHub is, why we made ALGO for GitHub, why it is GitHub and not Azure DevOps. And then there's a demo on how to get started with ALGO for GitHub. That demo is actually recorded. I'm not going to do the demo live here. And the reason for that is that very frequently when you do demos of anything, DevOps specific. You'll be waiting for a build to happen. You'll be waiting for workflows or pipelines to execute. And although I do like to tell jokes, I think it's very hard to tell enough jokes to actually get anywhere serious in a presentation like this with with the time for waiting on stuff like that to happen. I'm going to talk about local development environments, versioning primarily on ALGO for GitHub, not so much versioning for your own app. And then I'm going to do a live demo on how to keep your ALGO repository current, talk about future investment areas, and then maybe we'll have some questions at the end. So what is ALGO for GitHub? ALGO for GitHub is plug and play DevOps on GitHub. And of course, you'll have all the things that you normally would expect from a DevOps solution, like continuous integration, continuous deployment, but of course also some of the things that you get for free from GitHub: source control, pull requests, issue tracking, code reviews, collaboration, and all of these things. And then the ability to run automated functional and upgrade tests, and the ability to test your app against next major and next minor, doing release management, automatic continuous deployment to a QA environment, or publishing your PTE to a production environment. All of that is built in and something that you will just be able to use. So basically, it's all the functionality that 90% of partners needs from a DevOps solution. So it's not 90% of the functionality that all partners need, it's all the functionality that 90% of the partners needs. It's GitHub only. If you have a strategic decision that you need or want to be on Azure DevOps, then this presentation is not for you. Because ALGO for GitHub is not going to be ALGO for Azure DevOps. Why did we create ALGO for GitHub? Well, it's a tool instead of an investment area. So over the last 3 years, I think I've had various people on a hands-on lab at various conferences and other learning sites with the CI/CD hands-on lab, trying to teach people how to modify YAML and how to create containers and parameters for containers, and how do I run tests and all of these things. And a lot of people succeeded in setting something up. And then when I had a new version of the CI/CD hands-on lab, people were kind of like, okay, how do we then get the next version? You can grab the new files, and then you need to modify it yourself. And if you have maybe 10 or 20 repositories, it's a hassle to keep them up to date with the investments that there are. And by all means, the CI/CD hands-on lab didn't contain all the functionality that ALGO for GitHub does. So by using the CI/CD hands-on lab, it was really an investment area to do DevOps. It wasn't just a tool that you could use. And ALGO for GitHub reverses this. So there's no need for a DevOps engineer to use ALGO for GitHub. Yes, there's a short ramp up for developers to use this, and there's still probably one person who needs to know a little more than the other guys. But as you'll see, I think that the tool can be used by almost anybody. It's very easy to get started. You use a template on GitHub, and you'll have CI/CD for your app in just 5 minutes. And ALGO for GitHub will continuously be evolve. So there's continuous innovation, and these updates will be made available on ALGO for GitHub, and it's easy to actually take your the repository that you started with ALGO for GitHub and download the update. So it's easy to maintain your repository that you used a template to create. Just by running a workflow in GitHub, you'll be able to apply updates to that workflow and like get the latest version of Go for GitHub. And I think that's the crucial point here. It's a big differentiator from anything that we have done before, is this ability to keep your DevOps solution up to date. Why GitHub only? And then people might not agree with everything I say here, but as I see it, if Azure DevOps is an enterprise level DevOps, then GitHub is its lean and simple DevOps sibling, right? If DevOps engineers love Azure DevOps, then developers love GitHub. If Azure DevOps is like Visual Studio, then GitHub is like VS Code. And of course, there are other alternatives for Business Central on Azure DevOps. You have ALOps, you have Cosmos offerings, and which also uses ALOps, by the way. So our recommendation is, if you are staying on Azure DevOps, if you want to be on Azure DevOps, the recommendation is to look at those offerings. It is not to build a lot of stuff yourself, because you will be spending much more time than you would by using one of the existing tools. If the tools doesn't match your needs, then of course having a DevOps engineer and making it yourself is also an alternative. There were no tools for GitHub before Go for GitHub. There was the CI/CD Handsup for GitHub, but we didn't have a tool that could do these things for GitHub. And Azure DevOps is more feature-rich than GitHub, but Microsoft is investing heavily in GitHub. One of the things that we really want to leverage is Codespaces. Codespaces is the idea of being in GitHub and being able to actually launch VS Code directly in the browser and connect to maybe an online environment, and through that be able to modify your source, run, test your app, and install your app, and really develop in an online environment. Codespaces will never come for Azure DevOps. And also other things. Now, I've been working with GitHub heavily over the last probably half a year now, and things are just like appearing new functionality as we go along. In the beginning, Tobias said we were going to have a small exercise, or we were going to have a raise of hands thingy, and that's what pops up now. So what I'm going to talk about here is the DevOps Stairway to Heaven. And what I want to learn is how many of you are using certain, like, I'm going to ask how many people are using source control, how many people are using other pieces of DevOps. And instead of raising your hand when I ask the question, I'm going to ask you all to raise your hand beforehand. So if everybody clicks the raise your hand in the webinar thingy, then what I want is, whenever I display something in the presentation, I want you to lower your hand if you're not using that. So meaning that when I display the first line, then lower your hand if you're not using X. So I'll allow people a little time to actually get their hands up. We'll have some. So let's just see. Lower your hand if you're not using source control of any kind. So the people who have their hands up now are using source control. Lower your hand if you're not using any kind of continuous integration, like getting automated builds of your solution. Lower your hand if you're not using any form of test execution, automated test execution. Lower your hand. Oh, this one, if you have multi-country tests, you can run that. But the next one is lower your hand if you're not testing your app against next major and next minor. lower your hand if you're not, if your setup doesn't have like automated development environment setup assistance. Dependency management. Automatic signing of your app. Is that part of your DevOps solution as well? Continuous deployment to a QA environment. Let's see how many people are left with the hand up. A few are still there. Release management, publish to final acceptance test or to production right there from your DevOps solution. Keep your DevOps setup up to date. Handle multiple apps and repositories. And of course, it's not a coincidence that the things that I have on the list, I think we have one guy who still has his hands up, and two guys, I think. Yeah, so you can lower your hand now. It's done. But my point is that these topics or subjects are not here by coincidence. This is kind of a broad overview of what ALGo for GitHub can do for you. So by selecting a tool like that, you basically would get all of these things for free. And I'm going to talk about how that is now. Go for GitHub is a set of template repositories, 2 template repositories, one for PTEs and one for AppSource apps. And then there's one repository for actions. The actions is really where the code lies, like the pipeline that runs your CI/CD pipeline, and a lot of the other functionalities are placed in GitHub Actions. So the actual pipelines that are inside the repository will point to a version of this action and then use that to launch your code, or launch your inside the workflow. I'm going to roll a demo of how to do all of these things. So let me see if I can do that. So to get started, let me just pause this one. You can see that it is a pre-recorded demo. This is actually a few of the videos that are in the BC launch event as well. So there's no audio in the video, so I'm going to talk about this as if I did the demo live. So let's just roll this one, and the way that I want to create a repository is by going to AKMS, ALGo PTE, in order to create a repository for a PTE. And I'll select the owner and the name of this repository. And then I can select whether it's public or private. If it's private, I get to determine who's the contributor or reader and all of the other things. And in this case, I'll just create a public repository and create that. What this does is just to create a copy of an existing repository, and basically I'll have now a repository with nothing in it. These workflows are then the ones that I can use in order to add stuff to my repository. I can also clone this to my laptop and then check in code, but I can also run some of these workflows, and the create a new app is really the same functionality as if you are in VS Code and say Control Shift P and ALGo. So it creates a small demo Hello World app and adds that to your repository. So this one, create a new app. It runs for a minute or two and will create a pull request on your repository with this small Hello World app in it. So I actually did not select, I select direct commit, meaning that it will just commit it directly to the repository. So I have my loyalty app here, and what I can also do is, of course, add an existing app. Like, let me just, if you have a place where you have an app file or a zip file that contains a number of app files or source code to repositories, and you can place them here and say run this workflow. What it will do is unpack the zip file and analyze the content of it to see if there are any app files that can unpack or any folders, including an app JSON, and then it's going to take all of these apps and add those to your repository. In this case, I said no to direct commit, meaning it will create a pull request for me, and I can now navigate to the pull request and see what it actually added. So it added the Bing Maps PTE, and I can see the source and the logo and all the things that it extracted from the app file that was inside that zip file. Of course, this is not possible if it's a runtime package, but and also not if it's actually only if it's a runtime package, then it's not possible. So what I have now, I have two apps, and as you see now, this was a pull request, and then it automatically kicks off the CI/CD pipeline and built my app here. So it does a few things. It initializes, checks for updates, and now it's running my pipeline, downloading artifacts. And if you have ever used BC Container Helper and run AL pipeline, this will be familiar to you because that's the same functionality that lies behind the CI/CD pipeline in this one. It's compiling the apps and publishing the apps. Of course, if there was a prior version, it would publish the prior version first and then perform an upgrade of the app so it tests that the upgrade actually works. In this one, we can see that there's no build, no test apps, and no previous release found, and the artifacts contains the two apps that we just built. So the CI/CD pipeline will run, and as you can see, the test this time was successful, and I'll now have the apps created there. Oops. Yeah. So next up. So all of this was fine, right? What we've done now is we've done a number of things in GitHub in the browser, and then in the browser, right? Nobody develops a file or use GitHub for that. As long as we don't have code spaces, that's not where you would live. You need a development environment to work with, and for Go for GitHub, what we have is that you can develop against a local Docker environment, or you can develop against the sandbox environment. That's the two things that exist right now. I'm also working on developing against an Azure Container Instance or an Azure VM, running a traffic container that actually Tobias added to the repository, to BC Container Helper back in the time, so that you can set up a VM where you can host your environments. If you're developing against a local Docker environment, you of course need to have Docker installed locally, and then you clone your repository to your laptop and run a script called local.env that is included in the ALGO template. You specify the container name, a password, and optionally a license file for AppSource apps. That's mandatory, and then it will create an environment for you. After that, you can modify a file and just press a file, and it'll launch the container right away. So what it does when you run create a local Docker environment is that it actually not just creates the container, it also builds all the app and publishes those to the dev scope of the container so that it's ready for rapid application development afterwards. If you have like a lot of apps, this is it also modifies launch JSON to contain a pointer to your container. So let's roll a small video of how this is done, right? So now I can clone my repository, and inside of VS Code, I'll clone this down to my local machine, place it in some folder, and open the repo. And open the workspace, and inside of the ALGo folder, there's a local dev env ps1. If you run that in the latest version of ALGo, it won't look like this because it's not going to run it inside of VS Code. Cause some problems, so we're actually launching a PowerShell window and running it inside that one. But yeah, you specify the container name, a password, and no license file in this case. It will do all of the things that actually what's doing now is run a pipeline with some special parameters to leave the container and not run the tests, but create and build everything and publishing them to the dev scope of the container. Let's just wait a few seconds for this to complete. And again, it takes a little more time when you're doing it in real life. It's compiling all the apps in dependency order. So if any of the apps have a dependency on each other, it will of course be built first. Compiling your test apps and importing everything. And now your container is ready, have all the apps published and installed. And I can now go to the customer list here and change the caption from customer map to my customer map. Didn't do anything else. Press F5, select the local sandbox environment, and it will compile and publish only that app and publish that to the server, and I'll be able to see my change right there in the container. The same with if you create a cloud development environment, it will also publish all the apps so that it's ready to do RAD and change launch JSON to point to that environment. Great. So in this one, yeah, enter the key, geocode the customers, and now we can see that if we go to customer page, the fact box over there is called my customer map. I didn't show it beforehand, but trust me, it was called customer map before. So after that, we kind of have go for GitHub. We have our source there. We can do development in VS Code. We also want to set up continuous deployment. I wrote some blog posts a few weeks ago about what's supported by Go for GitHub, and what we want, what you can do as continuous deployment is to a QA environment. If you set up a QA environment of Business Central Online, then what you need to do in GitHub is to create an environment called QA as well. It is possible to have a different name if you have multiple environments called the same. So you can have like indirect names in Go for GitHub as well. But you will create an environment called QA, and environments in GitHub is only available in premium SKUs. So if you don't use any of those, you can also set up the environments in the settings file in Go for GitHub. After that, the only thing you really need is to add an auth context. And the auth context is really it's basically the same as you get from new BC auth context in BC Container Helper, either using OAuth user impersonation or S2S. And then it should be able to publish your app directly to your QA environment every time there is a successful build. So now we can modify the app and submit the changes to deploy that. Let's roll the video and see how this works. So I go to settings here, environments. There's no environments available, so I'll create an environment called QA. And the only thing I need now is to specify how this app actually, how is the authorization done to this environment. And I need a secret called auth context for that one. And the value can be given by 2 simple lines of PowerShell. New the auth context will include device login, and then create a JSON with the refresh token and the tenant ID. The device login will give me this code, and then I'll switch to my browser and log into a KMS device login, specify that code, and say yes to that PowerShell wants to, yeah, this one, and we should be good to have a refresh token and a tenant ID, and paste that into the secret and add that. That's all I need to do in order to set up continuous deployment of my app. So the only thing I needed to do in order to have CI was to add the app. The only thing I need to do for having CD is to actually specify how do I log into that environment. So now I can go into my source code and add another app here. I add the loyalty app with the enum and the table extension for that. And I submit the things that are necessary here. Add loyalty app. And by doing that, it automatically as well will kick off a CI/CD pipeline and now build and publish my app to my QA environment. So let's have a look at this one. Initialization done, building the app. And after this now, it will actually find a environment for deployment, whereas that was skipped the other times. And deployment to QA is done, so I can switch to my environment, go into the QA environment, navigate into the Business Central and have a look inside of customers to see that there's my customer map. And if I click one of the customers, my loyalty program was added to the customer page here. So I didn't have to hand carry any app. Everything just magically works as part of your CI/CD pipeline. So yeah, environments you can also publish to production environments, other things, and you can register all the environments, and the sandbox environments are automatically picked up for continuous deployment. The other ones needs to manually be deployed through the publish to environment workflow. So what if you created your ALGO repository of your app, and then like 2 months later there's a new version of ALGO for GitHub, and you think, how do I get all of these new functionalities, right? Well, that is what this section is. The versioning of ALGO for GitHub is done in a way that whenever you create a repository, it just copies the repository, and that copy has a settings file containing the type of PTE, and then a URL that points to the repository from which this repository was copied. GitHub.com, Microsoft, that's ALGO PTE, and then main. Main is, of course, the branch. Now, all the workflows will point to the ALGO actions repository, and then a specific version of these actions. So this one points to run pipeline version 0.2. You don't reference the main branch in ALGO actions. You reference a specific version of the actions here. With every build, the template is checked for whether there's any updates. So it checks whether there's a new version up here. And if there is a new version, it will display like a notification that there is updated ALGO system files. And then you update those by running a workflow and create those. So the reason for pointing to a specific version of the ALGO actions is that these will never change. So your repository will always work, or if it worked yesterday and no like breaking changes has happened inside of Business Central that makes it not work, then your repository will remain the same. We will never change version 0.2 of these actions, and you can still, that one will still work. It works in this way. That when we started out with the very first version, that was called v0.1 of ALGO PTE, and that points to the actions version 0.1. You clone you use that template and you create an action, an app like Business Central Demos, app 1, that has the template ALGO PTE main and uses actions v1, 0.1. Then we add like version 0.2 as preview or whatever. And right now, nothing changes for you because the main still points to version 0.1 and your repository remains intact. At some point in time, we will then move the main pointer to now v0.2 has shipped, it's released, and now that is main. After that happens, your pipelines will start saying new ALGO system files exists. And what you do then is you run the update ALGO system files, and your repository will now change to use actions 0.2, still pointing to the main one, of course, and then you're good with that. It changes your YAML files, and it changes your local scripts in the local dev.env and cloud dev.env. So if you have changes to the YAML files yourself, those will be overwritten. We do not recommend that you change YAML files in your repository yourself. There is a different solution for that. Now, version 1 shipped, and when we move main to that, then the same thing happens. You get a notification that new system files exist, and you can run the same workflow again. Let's have a look at that, how that actually works. And in this case, I actually do have a browser with a versioning demo here. So I created a small repository. I'm not going to run workflows here, but this is basically doing exactly the same as I've done before. This is all the workflows that have been run. I created the repository based on the PTE, created a new app. Based on that, I ran the CI/CD workflow. Looking at the CI/CD workflow, I don't have any deployment, but I have annotations saying that there are no test apps and there's no previous release found, and that is fine. After some time, there was a new release of ALGO for GitHub, and when I then ran a new pipeline, I got the notification that there are updates for your ALGO system files. Run update ALGO system files, workflow to download the latest version of ALGO. My build is still fine, and the only thing that changes is this notification will now pop up with every single build until I, of course, run that workflow. So that was the next thing I did. Run the ALGO update system files. That succeeded, and based on that, a pull request was created with updated ALGO system files. And with that pull request, also a CI/CD workflow, this time not on a manual run or on a commit, but on a pull request was launched. This one will tell me whether updating to this version will work. And as we can see, this doesn't produce any artifacts. So whenever we run CI/CD based on a pull request, we don't produce any artifacts. We'll just test, run the build and run the tests to see if everything actually works. Only when we then commit the changes into the main repository, that's when we'll have a completed build that we produce artifacts on. As we can see here, one of the annotations now is no performance test apps are found. And that's new. That wasn't part of the CI/CD before. And that's because this update of ALGO for GitHub actually contains a performance test runner as well. So if I just update from version 1.4 to version 1.5, I can see here that this is a new file. So create performance test app.yaml. So there's a new workflow in this one. And I can probably also see that there are some changes to CI/CD, that it uses now version 1.5 of the actions instead of version 1.4. And when I apply this one, then it will start launching my BCPT tests as well, if I have any of those in my repository. So let me go back here and go back to the presentation.
Freddy, maybe 2 questions while we're here. One is,
Yep.
can external cop, specifically the Business Central linter cop, be included in those pipelines? I guess that's the community cop that is created.
If they cannot at this time, then I would suggest that we add an issue in ALGO and then create it. I think there's a possibility to do that today, but it's probably, yeah, it's not something that there's a setting like just do this. I don't think so, but it's definitely something I want to support, or we want to support. So yeah, whoever wants to try that out, let's get an issue on Microsoft/ALGO and get that supported. Can you hear me now?
Now you're back. Yeah, great.
So I'm sorry, this is the second time that my laptop blue screens on me today. Right now I'm on the webinar through my phone. So luckily the presentation was probably almost over. I think I had yeah, 1 slide left with the future investments. I can talk to those instead. No more slideware there. But the question, let me see. I think we can just take the questions here. Then you can hear me here. Which question was I trying to respond to when I was killed?
We had the additional linter, and I said your answer was you're planning to do that, but I'm not exactly sure, and to add an issue on the GitHub repo, right?
Yeah. So what you can do is actually you can override what run AL pipeline does. It supports that you override like the function that creates the container or some of the other functions, and that's supported by ALGO as well. If you place a file called new BC container in the .algo folder, then it will be used to create the container, and the same with the compile app, so you can specify there. But for stuff like this, I'd like there to be a better support, not the hacky one, so that more people would actually do that. So getting an issue on Microsoft/ALGO would be awesome, because then we could get the right support for stuff like that. And I heard there was a question about scheduling things.
Exactly, how to schedule a, for example, test next major.
Yeah, and there is actually on github.com/Microsoft/ALGO, there is a number of different walkthroughs. One of them is how to schedule these things. What you do is basically you create a settings file that is specific for that repository, and then you specify a cron tab on when do you want these things to happen, and then you run the update ALGO system files, and it will then modify the YAML file for you with this cron tab as scheduled runs.
Do you see my screen? I went into the ALGO scenario. Maybe you can point me into the direction.
Yep, let me see if I can get away from these questions. I hand lowered. Right now on my thingy here, I only my laptop is back up, so I'll see if I can join with this one.
Okay.
Join webinar.
Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as an attendee in listen-only mode.
Okay.
So I've now made you a presenter. Maybe you can try to present again. Yeah, we can see your screen. Unfortunately, I can't hear you at the moment.
That is because I'm muted there. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now it works again.
Okay. Sorry about that mess. Not sure what goes wrong with my machine. So on Microsoft AL Go, there's a number of things here. I think one of them is to schedule next major, next minor. If not, then I'm pretty sure there is such a thing, but what you do is basically in the ALGO folder, not the ALGO folder, sorry about that, in the GitHub folder, you can place settings files that are specific to a workflow, like test current, test next major, or test next minor. These settings file will specify things that are, this one should have a cron tab. Why doesn't it? Is this one not running? Scheduled. Okay, not sure why, but that one should work. No. Yeah. But basically what you do is you specify that in this settings file, which isn't there. So not sure why that happened. Here we are.
Yeah.
It's this one. It's not the other settings file. So you can have a current schedule, next minor schedule. This is basically the name of your repository, and I'm pretty sure that there is a explanation here somewhere as well on how to do that. If nothing else, then this one will maybe, yeah, here we are. Basic repository settings in the settings file description. You can have a current schedule or next major or next minor on how to do that, and go to the contact guru to get help on how to create your cron tab instead of trying to create it manually.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Maybe a last question here, probably a quick one, as you only have 6 minutes left. Are there plans to provide IntelliSense support for ALGO settings, Jason?
That's a good idea. I'll add that as an idea. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, it's a good idea. One of the common questions, if there are no other questions, let me just show a little thing about dependencies. If you have a repository and you have dependencies to other repositories or other projects, so everything you have inside of one repository is of course built in the order that that you specify. So if you have dependencies between your apps, they will be built in the right order. If you have dependencies to other repositories, maybe like there are a few ways of specifying these dependencies today. Not here, it's inside this one, of course. This is a dependency to a public repository. So it just specifies the repo, and then it'll automatically download the latest released version of that one. If you don't want the latest release, you can specify the release status as latest build, then you get the latest build from that repository. If, like this one, it's a private repository, then you need to specify which secret contains the token for me to access that repository. So if you are accessing builds from a foreign repository, you have to specify the name of a secret that contains the token, not the token itself in the settings file, obviously. And with that, let me go into this one and find the last slide. Here we are. And just talk about future investment areas for 2 minutes. No dates, no promises. Code coverage is something we really want to add. Performance testing was actually added in version 1.5. We want to do a nicer error reporting. API/web services testing, like you have a folder for test apps, you have a folder for BCPT apps, you could have a folder for API tests where you basically add a Postman collection or something like that and we could then use Newman to execute those tests against your container so that you actually will know that your APIs works with the new version of this app, so you don't break your integration scenarios. Better performance. Right now you can specify your self-hosted runners to get up running faster, but nothing has been done to like be able to build without containers or anything like that. It goes through the run.al pipeline and we'll still do that, but we might want to do things to increase the performance there. Develop using code spaces is something we want to be looking at. Release to AppSource validation. I actually managed to get hold of a team that is working on an API for Partner Center, and I'm working with people from that team right now to see if we can make that one happen in near future. And also, we also want to create what's called like workflows that would allow your repository to download validation results from Microsoft, so that when we do a next major run in validation, we kind of could leave the validation results for you in App Insights or something like that, and then your workflow could automatically in a schedule run those and query those and create an issue on your own repository based on that. These few features are just appearing when you update your ALGO 65, of course. Yeah, so I don't know if there are any more questions in the last minute here.
No, I think all of those have been answered.
And I'm so sorry for the sudden disturbance, but now I also have webinar on my phone, so yeah, thanks for listening in, and back to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that very interesting presentation, the overview, and of course also the directions. Can't wait to see where code spaces are going. That's certainly a very interesting area. So to wrap it up, maybe from the Areopa standpoint, thanks again to the sponsor ForNav for allowing us to use the GoToWebinar session. And as a small reminder, those are the URLs for YouTube, for the newsletter, and for emails. So thanks again for listening. I'll take a last look at the questions. No, nothing new in here. So again, thanks a lot for joining today. Remember the great sessions that are coming up by Kenny and by Luc. And then let's talk again soon.